Some of you will have seen my videos where I'm navigating with just a map and compass. If you're looking to understand how to go from a blank sheet of paper to a detailed plan covering everything from setting a bearing, calculating distance and timings, breaking down a route into manageable chunks, what tools I use, then you'll want to stick around, because by the end of the video the goal is to demonstrate that proper navigation planning is not as daunting as it might first seem. In fact, for me it really adds another layer of enjoyment, and I get a huge sense of achievement when it works out. Or maybe it doesn't work out as first planned, but I successfully managed to adapt the plan on the go. I rarely stick to the marked trails, so knowing how to navigate properly off track isn't just a skill, it's absolutely essential. And getting off those well-trodden paths unlocks a whole new level of freedom with lots of benefits. You can explore places others just don't go or can't go because they simply don't have the skills needed to get there. You will become more self-reliant. The more you get off track, the quicker you'll build confidence in your own abilities. You become better at decision making. You have to when you're miles from anywhere, and this in itself will have a positive knock-on effect into many other areas of your life. When you're out on your own in the wild, or maybe with a friend or two, you have to really focus on the task at hand. You're naturally more present, your senses are heightened, seeing and experiencing things that are just not available to the majority of people. The isolated waterfall, the miles of unbroken bogland, cliff faces, and sometimes hidden caves. You're focused and thinking clearly about the route, the weather, your surroundings. You have left your daily stresses behind and not having to interact with anyone else if you choose to go out alone. I'm not a loner, but probably like yourself, I do love being alone at times. But here's the thing, to truly unlock those benefits, to experience that freedom safely and confidently, really requires careful planning. It's all about planning for success. Now, I know this might seem a little bit daunting initially, but honestly, once you've done it a few times, it gets easier and quicker, and you'll develop your own planning routine. I did, and I've got a workflow that I follow each time, and this video lays that out. This is an example of the planning steps I go through. This is a real plan, one that I developed for an actual hike and wild camp, and it turned out to be a fantastic trip. I really did enjoy it. I also had a great chat with an Irish sheep farmer and got lots of views on hiking, wild camping, and his strong thoughts about bringing pet dogs out, whether as sheep and cattle. You can see the full discussion in a video, and I'll link to that at the end of this. I start off with a real physical map. I find it better than an app on my phone or even the desktop, as I can spread it out. I get a good feel for the whole area. I can go anywhere, so this gives me a great overview. I then focus in on an area that catches my attention. I'm using a 1 in 50,000 map here. It's quite large. I would prefer a 1 in 25,000 most of the time, as it gives more detail. But for this area, Sligo in Ireland, then it's the one that I've got, and so it's the one that I'm using. Once I've chosen a general area that looks interesting, I then need to look at the area in more detail, so I switch to either a smaller scale physical map, or I fire up one of the many useful apps that are great for drilling down deeper into. Years ago there were none of these, no GPS or other such tools, but I'm not against tools like this at all. A map and compass was new technology at one time, so whatever helps, use it when planning. The key is not to rely on this electronic kit when you're out in the field, because at some time or other it's definitely going to fail on you, like it has for me. Now, a map and compass, funny enough, can fail, and both have done so for me in the past. I have dropped my map once and had to retrace my steps. Luckily I found it. You can see that in one of my videos. I've also lost a compass, but luckily I had a spare. But that said, electronic nav aids are more prone to let you dig down in my experience. Batteries are always running out, or the phone with a nav app stops working when it gets wet. And it will if you have to use it in poor weather. And if that's all you've got, then you're constantly looking at it. But when a phone does get wet and it stops working, it's really not fun, especially if you're miles out in the wilderness. To date, as you can see on the screen, I've been using a free version of Gaia GPS app. It's been a very useful app for me this last year when planning. This is a desktop version on the screen at the moment. It allows me to very quickly produce a nice roughed out route and get a lot of information fast. I could do something very similar on my phone, but the bigger desktop screen is much more useful. You can see the distance for the whole route, or just on each leg or to a specific spot, by using the cursor and dragging the pointer along the track itself. The elevation graphic gives a nice pictorial view of how difficult the route is likely to be. Shows you the peaks and troughs. You can see from the map here that it's showing hillocks, and this was quite rough, and on the day, yeah, I actually did find this quite rough going, so that was quite accurate. The heather itself may not be that bad, but if it's extensive, it can be very tedious and tiring, and you won't really know until you get on the ground. I have a good example in one of my videos. I'll put a clip up of a route that I took, and it turned out to be a real trial. It was heather, and there was hillocks up to my knees, and you couldn't really tell that from the map. But sometimes you've just got to go there and find out. I wouldn't do that walk again, but it was an excellent learning experience and great navigation practice. It allowed me to understand what sort of timing I would achieve across that sort of terrain. So in the future, if I came across similar, then I'd know how much to adjust it by, because I've already had that experience. There are a great many factors to take into account when planning. There's a certain amount of science and calculation involved, as I'll demonstrate, but it's also more of applying a methodology which needs to be adapted for the day that you find. It might be important, if you want to keep the weight down, to identify water sources. At this point here, it's a little bit covered over by that mark, but there is a lock there. And so I avoided carrying another 2 kilograms up this very steep approach until I got to the lock, and I was able to top up there, and it made a huge difference. I started off later in the afternoon. I pitched up early for a change, so many times in the past I've just ploughed on and found myself rushing to pitch tent as the light was going. And although that was always fine, so far anyway, a few times it got uncomfortably close to darkness, and in darkness I just fancied a more relaxed setup. So it made sense just to chill out, cook in the open before the sun went down, and to have a nice time. As I was saying, once I've roughed the route out, by looking at the elevation, by looking at the timings here, and looking at the steepness, I can adjust my track if I decided to go a little bit further or cut it short. It's very easy on an app just to move things about and see how that affects your overall plan. I always try to stay away from marked tracks as much as possible. It means that I'm practicing my navigation in a more extreme way. I'm staying away from other people, and I just find it more fun. And the initial planning, I was also note some points of interest that I might take a drone shot from, so I noted those down on my plan as well. I was also check out the best access point for the start of the hike and where it might be safe to park up. On this particular hike, I actually scouted it out 2 weeks beforehand. Don't usually have this luxury, but I was in the area and I thought, you know what, I'll take a look. And just by doing that, I came across the farmer and had a nice chat, and he was very helpful. And that actually gave me the confidence to go and head out there and park up there 2 weeks later, knowing that I had full permission, and he was going to be very friendly to me doing that. I've only very recently started to use Google Earth to get a good feel for the ground, but I'm finding it very handy, and I'm using it all the time now. You can actually start looking and seeing if there's anything blocking your route, and then you can adjust. You can start looking for forested areas. You can see these on the map, but sometimes it's very hard to judge how thick they are. You get a reasonable view of that using Google Earth. Years ago, of course, had nothing like that. Just had to take the map and imagine what it looked like in my own head. But it actually is a fantastic tool to use. If you're enjoying this, maybe hit the like, subscribe button. This will let me know if the content is of use to you. Comments are also always appreciated. I do really enjoy the backwards and forth, the interaction with yourselves, like-minded people. Let's take a look at some of the basics. Let's get started with taking a bearing. Now, I use the standard silver Expedition 4 magnetic compass. There are other types, but this is the best one for our sort of use, and it's not too expensive either. But don't get the smaller one. There are smaller versions out there. Unless you want one for a backup, they're not really suitable for serious map navigation and planning. So I'm also demonstrating this using a snapshot from the Gaia GPS app, as it provides less clutter. But just imagine it's a real paper map. It was just easier to show what I want to do on the screen. By the way, the best map for hiking in the UK and Ireland are the OS series, the Ordnance Survey, and in Ireland, the OSI Ordnance Survey Ireland. There are other types, notably Harvey, which show the more popular hiking and climbing routes, but the areas I go to are not covered by Harvey. Although it's worthwhile taking a look, they're well worth trying. For this example, so I'm starting from just above the lower loch, heading straight up to Kilogee Mountain 438 spot height. By the way, when I actually did the hike, the plan changed from the very start, as the farmer who owned local land recommended that I head up more to the right. So instead of starting off here and heading up through the trees, he said it's much clearer to go up to the right and then dogleg back, and then I picked the track up. And actually, if you look at the video, you can actually see exactly what I did. But from a planning point of view, what we do is we line up the edge of the compass, making sure that the top of it is pointed in the direction you want to go. So the top of it being this part here, and it shows you the arrow in the direction you want to go. And line that up on either the line that you've drawn on your plan, going from where you want to start to where you want to finish. Sometimes it's easier to use what's called a parallax line. That's this line here. Okay, so you would actually position that over the track that you want, and actually you get less errors than potentially you would do using the edge of the compass. But I tend to use the edge because then I can use the graticule on the left hand side here to calculate distances very quickly. So once you've lined up the compass along the track that you want to follow, you turn the bezel so that the lines within the circular housing line up with the north-south grid lines on the map. So here's this bezel, the circular bezel that you move around to get your compass bearings. Here are the lines inside the bezel, and the red represents the topmost, the northern part, and the black the southern. And it's very important that you get these the right way around, otherwise you'll end up going 180 degrees. That is the opposite direction to where you want to go. And you line these up with the grid lines. Now, this map here doesn't have the grid lines showing, but if I superimpose one on it, we can see that if I was looking at a paper map, there would be lots of these grid lines. And what I'm doing here is I'm lining up one of these lines here with what would be the north and south grid line on the map. And in this particular map, it's on position 775, but I'm not going to go into coordinates. That can be the subject of another video. And as I said, the main point here is to make sure that the line in the bezel lines up very accurately with the grid line. So we can now read off the bearing on the index pointer, which is showing as 352 degrees. So if I set 352 degrees when I'm out in the field, I'll be following that track there up to Kilogee Mountain 438. I'm actually showing the magnetic needle in line with the bezel arrow. In this case, the map is also orientated with the ground. That is, if I looked up in the direction of the compass, I would see that I was pointing right up at Kilogee Mountain. It would be right in front of me. Now, this is not necessary when planning out a route at home. In fact, don't even bother trying it. It's actually pointless until you're actually out hiking. If you align the compass along the route and then the bezel lines along the map grid lines, you get 352 degrees without needing to line up the magnetic needle. This may not be obvious from watching the video, but if you get a hold of a map and a compass and try it, you'll see. Just as a reminder, I'm not trying to go too deeply here into the theory, but what I'm trying to do here is to show you my experience of following the techniques. Maybe encourage you to go deeper into the subject and try it all yourself. And with the intention of not going too deep, but maybe risking doing that somewhat, I do need to mention declination for completeness to show you it's straightforward, but you do need to be aware of it at least. There are a few norths when talking navigation. There's grid north, true north, and magnetic north. Now, they're fairly straightforward once you know, but they can cause a bit of confusion when starting off. Grid north is represented by the lines on the map running north and south. That'll be these lines represented by the one red line here in this demonstration. This points to the physical or geographic north, also called true north, which is located in the Arctic, somewhere up there north. It's not exactly correct to say grid north on the map lines up exactly with true north. This is due to the curvature of the Earth, and there is something called grid convergence, but for our purposes it can be ignored. Maps need to be drawn up using a standard geographic reference point for the grid lines, and hence they point to the physical North Pole, or close enough for our navigational purposes, as I've just said. And then there is magnetic north. The magic source which revolutionised navigation when it was discovered, and they found a way to track it. And it is tracked using the magnetised red arrow within the bezel, which always points to magnetic north. Magnetic principles have been understood theoretically since the 1600s, and magnetic North Pole was actually reached in 1831 during an Arctic expedition. The only problem with magnetic north is this force emanating from close to the physical North Pole, but not exactly there. It is in fact constantly moving very slowly over time. This varies from year to year slightly, and at present in Ireland it's just under 3 degrees to the west of true or geographic North Pole. You need to check it out from wherever you are in the world. And so the difference or deviation is known as declination. To understand how much this will affect you from a navigation point of view, if I had a 3-degree variation to the west, which is what it is at this moment in time in Ireland, if I travelled 1 kilometre without making any adjustment for this declination, then I'd be 50 metres off track. Now that's quite significant, and normally it's not as significant for me because I don't tend to do stage lengths of more than half a kilometre. Sometimes I do, but what I will do is I'll split them up and I'll work out a point in between if it's a straight line and it's over a kilometre. With 3 degrees west, I just need to add 3 degrees. But notably, in the past, the value has been as much as minus 22 degrees in the west. That was in the late 1800s. So it would have had a major effect then. I actually find that this subject tends to complicate things too much when getting started. It all feels a bit much, so I might come back to this in a later video, but all you have to remember is declination does have a slight effect because of where the magnetic pole is. It's slightly different to the true north, which is what the grid lines are pointing to, and you can take that into account easily. We see the compass is set for 352 degrees. If we were going to add declination, it would have been another 3 degrees, 355 for me. As I said, I'm leaving that out for the moment. I measured the distance using the side scale on the compass to be 1,150 metres. Now I'm on a 1 in 50,000 map. Each square grid on the map is 20 millimetres by 20. So 1 millimetre scale line on the side of the compass represents 50 metres on the ground. 20 times 50 equals 1,000 metres. So 23 millimetres, which I measured on the map, represents 1,150 metres on the ground. Okay, so straightforward. Just be aware that for demonstration purpose that doesn't line up with the diagram that I'm actually showing at the moment. Now if I was using a larger scale map, that is 1 in 25,000, that then 23 millimeters measured on the map would represent 25 times 23, which equals 575 meters on the ground. So a smaller distance, hence more detail for the same area on the physical map. Now, I do prefer to use 1 in 25,000 maps where I can, but you will need a lot more of them to cover a particular region. So having found the distance, I now need to take into account the time it takes to travel over the ground for this distance. And in this case, it's 23 minutes. So the way we work that out is I need to understand how fast my pace or speed is across the ground. And to do that, I need to consider a number of factors. How rough the terrain is it flat, easy, is it boggy, is it heathery, is it more difficult for whatever other reason, what weight am I carrying? I'll go faster if I've no backpack or a light day pack, slower if I've got a heavy backpack full of camping kit. I mean, I'm typically carrying between 18 and 20 kilograms, and that's going to slow me down. So all of these factors contribute to the speed you're able to achieve across the ground. For this hike, I've not been out for several weeks. My fitness is reasonable. I've had no illnesses. I've got a heavy backpack. It's also towards the end of the day. A little less energy maybe. I don't know. I might factor that in. I also know the terrain is heathery and there's a wooded area that I've got to go through, and it's very steep. Now it is springtime and it should be drier, but my experience of the tops of Irish mountains is that they can be boggy any time of the year. So with that in mind, I'm going to start off using a pace of 3 kilometers an hour for my overall planning. Now, I'll monitor this for the first leg, probably two, because the second leg is quite different terrain than the first. And then I'll adjust accordingly as I feel I need to. It's more a methodology as opposed to a science. So you have to take all of these factors into account and come to a judgment for yourself. And the only real way you become good at that is by getting out there and practicing. Later on in this journey, I can see flatter areas here and maybe coming down from Hangman's Hill. Well, that might be faster. I might change that to 4 kilometers an hour. I don't know. It'll all depend when I get there what this really does look like and whether I think I need to change or not. Because if I do need to change, if I am walking faster, then I will have to amend my plan. I will have to adapt, otherwise my calculations will be out. Now, I use a simple table for calculating the time it will take me to walk over a specific distance at a certain pace, and it's very straightforward. You could work all of these timings out manually, and of course I have done. I've double checked all of these figures. If I need to adjust my plan during a hike, I want to keep the process as simple as possible. I mean, try using mental arithmetic or having to pull out a calculator app on your phone when you can hardly see ahead of you, the wind is blowing a gale, it's raining hard, your hands are freezing. You'll find that almost impossible. I suggest you copy this table and get used to using it. I found it extremely handy. So in this example, we can see at a speed of 3 kilometers an hour over a distance of 1,150 meters, that is 23 minutes. So we get that by looking at 3 kilometers an hour. That's the times there. I've got a table set out as 5, 4 and 3 kilometers an hour. 1,150, so 1,000 is 20, 100 is 2, and 50 will then be 1. So that's 23 minutes. Now, I always do a quick estimate to ensure I've not made a silly mistake. So at 3 kilometers an hour over 1 kilometer, for instance, that would be 20 minutes. And we know that we're just going over 1 kilometer. So 23 minutes is in the right ballpark. Now, 23 minutes will be the time over flat ground, but I'm not walking over flat ground. Never do. I need to take into account the effect the gradient will have. And the first leg is up a really steep mountainside. So logically, it's going to be slower. A good rule of thumb is found using something called Naismith's rule. I'm just going to summarize it here. There's some very good descriptions, quite technical descriptions that you can find online, but it's essentially a reasonably fit person would add about another minute per contour, and per contour is 10 meters. So actually the contours, if we see them here, that's 250. So the next contour is 260, 270, 280. So what we're saying here is going from 250 to 260, I add a minute, and then another minute, and then another minute per contour. And it's a reasonable rule of thumb. So I find it works reasonably accurate. And remember, it's an art, not a science. It all depends on your own physicality, what you're carrying, what time of day, etc., etc. For this leg, there are an additional 28 contours that have to be taken into account. We have originally 23 minutes for the distance that we're going. If we were going over flat ground, we're going up approximately 280 meters. We're ascending, and that's another 28 minutes, so 51 minutes. So from this point here to that point there, we're saying 51 minutes. Now, actually, remember, I already broke this because I actually moved off to the right and over to the left, and so I would have recalculated from when I got back on track here. But from an initial planning point of view, that's what it is. So now I want to talk about what we call checking and catching features. A checking feature is, as you're going along, you check them off. Pick a number of key points on the route, and as you pass them, say, yeah, okay, I've passed that, and I've passed it in the time that I expected. I must be on track. So when we're looking at the checking for this particular stretch, we can see that I'm climbing continuously. We can see that all the way up, it's climbing, climbing, climbing. If I started to go down or started to even out, well, if I haven't got to this point here where it does even out, I could be going off to the left. I could have started drifting away, or off to the right and stayed on the same continent. Did I pass through the tree line here at the time that I was expecting? Now, we have to be careful with tree line, especially if it's commercial forestry. This isn't, but commercial forestry, the edges can change. So on a map, it's not entirely accurate, but it's a good indicator as long as you bear in mind that it could change. Another one is when I'm parallel to Kilogi Boy Southwest top, SW top at 417. So I'm taking about this point here, and what I've said up to that point there, it's 16 millimeters times 50 is 800 meters. Now 800 meters at 3 kilometers an hour is 16 minutes. So if we just look up here, 800 meters, 3 kilometers an hour, 16 minutes. Now I've also had to climb up 24 contours to get to that point. I've risen to 240 of my 280 meters ascent. Actually 278 to be totally accurate. But 240 meters, and that's another 24 minutes. So 24 plus 16 is 40 minutes. On a clanged in day, then I couldn't actually use that. Maybe I'd use the start of where the ground was getting rougher. So those are checking off features. Now, then we're moving on to catching features. And catching features are if you've gone too far, what's going to tell you. So the easiest ones here to understand is that if the ground is rising to the right-hand side, I've hiked too far to the left, so that would be a catching feature. So if for some reason I'd started going off to the left here, I can see that the ground is rising to my right, okay, quite strongly there, and that would be saying, hang on a minute, have I swung around too much here? And I'd say, well, okay, fine, maybe I have. Let's stop. Let's think about this. Let's check my map, check my compass. I may have drifted off it because it's very easy to drift off, and a few minutes in the wrong direction, you can go a long way. Also, if I'd gotten to the top, and this is a very flat top, you can see the contours are not close together. So once I start getting over this point here, it starts flattening. The ground is getting rougher. But once I start going downhill, I know I've gone too far. So I'd stop and I'd check my timing. I was due to be 51 minutes. Now, if I hadn't looked at my watch and then all of a sudden I realised I was down at 55 minutes, then I'd do a 180 degree and I'd turn back for 4 minutes and I'd see where I was then. So that's a catching feature. And we'll talk about that on the next leg as well. Now, it's easier to understand these features in the good weather, but you also need to be really focused from the weather's getting bad. And you'll get a sense as you practice of what the ground feels like under your feet. So you'll actually start feeling, as opposed to just looking, that the ground is sloping one direction or the other. It's easy to see these features in good weather, but you need to be more aware in poor visibility. You need to be able to sense the ground in relation to your body. You'll be able to do that more effectively as you gain more experience. So getting out there and practice. We can do so much theorising, but you've really got to get out and get the miles under your belt. Let's do a second leg as a final example, working out the distance, the timing. This leg is coming down from Kilogi Boy Mountain 438, and we're going down to what's called the Black Loch. Now this is where I plan to pick up water, so hopefully it's drinkable, but I do have a filter. Now this is quite different terrain than going up. The map is showing it's rougher. In theory, it should be a bit easier going downhill, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it turns out to be tough enough. There's a lot of heather, and the heather is in clumps, in hillocks, so the pace can be just the same going down as it is coming up. So I'm going to keep this at 3 kilometers an hour. So following the same process, I line the compass along the route I want to take. I turn the circular bezel until the lines within the housing line up with the north-south grid line, just the same as before, taking care to ensure that the red lines in the compass bezel are uppermost on the map. Or remember, if you turn that around and had the black lines, you'd be 180 degrees in the wrong direction. And I need to make sure the lines within the bezel line up with the north-south grid line. And again, it's not necessary during planning to orient the map and along the line I want to go, and with keeping the lines within the bezel running in parallel with the north-south grid line, I'm good to go. And then I can read off the bearing that I need to follow on the ground. And of course, when I get on the ground, that's when I've got to line the magnetic needle with the housing within the bezel to make sure that I'm going in the correct direction. So we've got a bearing here of 058 degrees. Now I haven't taken declination into account. I'd add 3 degrees onto that, so that would be 061 degrees. So now that we've got the bearing, I need to measure the distance, and using the side of the compass, I measured that at 350 meters. So a reminder that it's a 1 in 50,000 map, and each square is 20 millimeters by 20. I measured 7 millimeters, 7 5s are 35, and a 0 on the end there because it's 50 is 350 meters. We have the distance and we have the bearing. Now we just need to work out the timing. So I go back to my trusty table there. I'm working at 3 kilometers an hour at 350 meters. It's 4 plus 2 and another 1. That's 7 minutes. Now I'm going downhill. I'm not taking into account any of the contours going down. The general rule of thumb is that you don't need to, unless it's really quite steep and you make a decision that you need to add something on for the steepness or the ruggedness. Now I could have added 10% on here because it is quite rough there. Maybe I should have been about 8 minutes. That would be reasonable to do in this instance. And remember, we also need to look at the checking and the catching features. So some of the checking features going down is I'm still in scrub going all the way down to the lock. Yeah, well, that's an easy one to remember. A catching one would be that the scrub has stopped when I get down towards the lock. I could have been more to the right, and then I'll think, hang on a minute here, I can't see the lock, but the scrub has stopped. Maybe I've gone too far over to the right and the lock is off to my left. I would also see that as I'm going down the hill, the closer I get, the contours are swinging round to my left and also round to my right. So yeah, if that's happening, then all well and good. If I'm going more to the right, then actually I won't see the hill bending around as much. So it might say, oh, hang on a minute here, I should actually be more over to the left. And once I get to a certain point, I might even be able to see the lock, especially if it's in good weather. Probably when I get to around about this point here, once I've gotten over the flat part. So about halfway along, maybe about the 3-4 minute point, I should be able to start seeing the lock. Now, if I come across the path before I come across the lock, and it's at right angles, I know I've said parallel here, that's a mistake there, but if it's more at right angles, then actually I'm to the right of the lock and all I need to do is to follow the track up. If I'd headed more to the left, I'd come across a track that's heading up. I'd be thinking, oh, hang on a minute here, I actually should be following this path to the right. Another catching feature would be if I actually started rising, I'd know I'd gone too far. That's all I wanted to say on the distance, the timings and the bearings. There's another technique called pacing. It's more advanced, it's more for micro navigation, but just for completeness, I thought I'd talk about it. You can have it in your back pocket and try it now if you feel that's for you, or else come back to this at a later date. I don't often use this technique myself, but it can be very useful over a relatively short distance if the weather is bad and I can't see very far. And maybe there are hazards that I want to stay clear of. For instance, a cliff edge, if the weather has turned very nasty and I know I'm near a sheer drop, then I might think of using pacing. Some people teach it to use it over long distance, 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometers. That's fine if in an emergency you've lost other navigation aids. I'm quite happy using up to 500 meters. Beyond about 500 meters, I think you should be using other techniques like distance and timers, but that's my personal opinion. But let's take a quick look at the technique itself. As I said, it's not a technique really to start off with. Get used to the distance, timings, compass work first. But once you're ready, we'll have a go at the pacing. As the name suggests, the technique is really simple as counting your paces from point A to point B. But paces in this case aren't just single footsteps. The convention is to actually time it from either the left or the right leg, so you're counting on the same foot each time. Now, I count with my left foot. I would start off swinging my right foot in front of me, bring my left foot, and that's one pace.
22, 23, 24, 25.
What we need to do is we need to calculate how many paces you're going to take for 100 meters. Now that's different to everyone because leg length is different. So to calculate your pace, you mark out on a map, maybe a local track, 500 meters, and you count the number of paces and divide it by 5, or if it's 600, divide it by 6, and you'll get the number per 100 meters. Do that backwards and forwards 2 or 3 times and average them out. I find that I have a pace of 66 per 100 meters. So it's easy enough to work out how many paces in this example of 350 meters. I get 230 paces. So you can either work out 3 times 100, so it's 3 times 66 plus 33 paces, or use your calculator, it would be 0.66 times 350, which is 230 paces. And essentially away you go. Now, one of the things though is when working out that pace, it will change over the different type of terrain, the load you're carrying, but it's best not to overcomplicate this at the beginning. Once you start looking at this technique, you will look to work out how many paces you're going to do over typical terrain, and you will then adjust accordingly. The main problem with this technique is that you need to make sure that you don't lose count. If you're relying on this form of navigation in bad weather, it's essential to have a foolproof method for this. Now, you could use pebbles. I've done that in the past. I've had a handful of pebbles in one pocket, and for each 66 strides, 100 meters, I've moved a pebble across into another pocket, so you don't lose touch. But if you just count on your fingers, you're definitely going to lose count at some stage. Or you could buy yourself a set of pacing beads. This is what a lot of people would use. They're used in the military. A lot of mountain leaders would use these and use them on a regular basis. Now, pacing bead setup has 4 beads on the left-hand side here and 9 there. As you're walking along, you would slide a bead for each 100 meters of travel. 9 beads, 100 meters per bead. Once you've got to the 9th, you're at 900 meters, then you count off another 100, and then you move down one of the other beads here. And then you reset the 9 beads. Okay, so and this represents kilometre. So you've got 4 beads here, represents 4 kilometres plus 9 beads, 4.9 kilometres. But to me, that's too much of a distance. I'd only use that if I'd lost use of my other navigational aids. But it's there, you can use it, you can practice it, and it is a great backup, and it does work really well. If you wanted to look at this in more depth, there's a great video from a qualified mountain leader who has a YouTube channel called The Map Reading Company. It's very informative. He doesn't recommend you use it for too far a distance either. Now, my planning process workflow may seem a little daunting at first sight, but with a bit of practice, it's really quite straightforward. And I'm just using the basics time and time again. So you can see there's a lot of repetition here. Once you can do it for one leg, then you can do it for all of the legs in this plan. Now, I draw out a paper plan each time. I know it looks a bit busy, it looks a bit complicated, but as I just said, each one of those legs is repetition of the one in front of it there. I like to show a fairly accurate representation of the plan as it would be on a map. I draw it out and I'm putting here the main features: Kilogiboy Southwest top, here's Kilogiboy top, 435 meters, here's the other mountain tops themselves, Kilogiboy Far East top, and on each leg I'm showing the bearing, so 352 degrees. I'm showing it's 1,150 meters. I'm showing the timing, 51 minutes there, and I'm showing it's for this particular leg, and that I'm running at 3 kilometers an hour. And as I've just shown you, that second leg going downhill from Kilogiboy top down to the lock, not exactly looking like a lock, but that's what it was supposed to be. So that goes down from 435 meters to 390 meters. So I'm going downhill. Remember, it was quite rough going down here. So it was 058 degrees. And remember, if I was putting the declination in, I'd be adding another 3 degrees to this. So it would be 061 degrees. 350 meters. I worked it out at 7 minutes to get down there, and maybe 8 minutes if I wanted to take into account how rough the ground was. And for this particular leg, I worked out that the number of paces would be 230 paces to get from there down to the edge of the lock. And you've seen how I've worked that one out. But I wouldn't focus on the pacing to start with. I just wanted to give a view of that. And each one of these legs here is exactly the same. It's just a repetition. It's repetition. It's repetition. And that's all it is really. Repetition and practice. And also remember, I use the first 2 legs from a route to actually see how well I'm traveling on the day. And if I find that I'm really bombing along, then I'll make adjustments on the other legs, bearing in mind what sort of terrain I'm expecting on these other legs as well. Whereas I've calculated all of this at 3 kilometers an hour, it would be very easy just to make a change on the timing here if it was at 4 kilometers an hour, because I'd just look at the table and it'd be very easy to work that one out. There have been many times when I just don't follow the full plan step by step. For example, as you can see in the video, I did mention that I'd pitched up at the lock when I'd planned to pitch up over at Hangman's Hill. I didn't go up to Kilogiboy top. I actually cut the route short. But having a plan gives you the confidence that it's easy to make adjustments. You know where you are. You feel really quite good in having something that you've worked out, and it's very easy to amend a plan as opposed to produce a brand new plan on the fly. And also producing a plan in the first instance give me the confidence from the very start that I've thought it through properly. It's realistic. basic. I know what I have to do if I need to cut it short or extend it at any point, and I know how long it will take, and I know that I've picked what looks like a safe route, and I've looked at the majority of the hazards that I'd have to deal with. And one final point is I take my map and I take my paper plan and I put it into a map case. I always use a map case. If you don't use a map case and you've got a paper map, well, very soon you're going to have just a mush of paper if the weather turns bad, unless you've bought a laminated map in the first place. This outer surface here is quite sticky, and if you put a compass on this, it will stay in place. So on one side, I'll put my map and I'll put my area of interest roughly in the center, depending on how well the map folds without putting too many creases in it. On the reverse side, I'll have the paper map that I've written out and my table for a quick reference. So I could just flip from one side to the other, and anyone who's seen my videos will have seen that that's the way I actually do use it in practice. So that's it. I hope this has been of interest and maybe help give some people confidence to try out. And if you're already doing it, maybe try in more difficult terrain or try pacing. My advice is to keep it simple. Practice the steps every time you go out. So even if it's good weather, you know exactly what to do when the weather turns bad. If you want to take a look at the actual video related to this hike, then click on it somewhere here. It was a really great hike, to be quite honest. It's quite a long one. I think it was 40 minutes, but you can scoot along to the sections that you're interested in. And don't forget to like if you did like it. Let me have any comments. Love to have comments. And depending on what feedback I get, it could well be the subject of the next video. So, till next time.